You know, there's this question that always seems to pop up if you talk to someone who creates, well, really dark stuff. Writers, filmmakers, artists,
Oh, yeah, the awkward one.
right? That's slightly uncomfortable. Why do you write about things like that? It's a gruesome subject.
As if it's purely a menu selection, you know?
Hmm.
Today I'll choose existential dread with a side of body horror.
Exactly. And that's really what we're diving into today. We've got some fascinating excerpts here from a classic story collection, and we're looking specifically at the author's own thoughts on that question
Huh?
and, the kind of stuff that gets caught in that creative filter.
Yeah, our mission for this deep dive is basically to unpack his thinking on why he writes horror, why we read it, and then look at how those ideas actually, well, play out in some of these really chilling story fragments we have.
So we've got bits from his introduction where he kind of lays out his philosophy, and then fragments from, wow, a real range of stories. Psychological terror,
Well,
Sheen's Gone Bad.
even like cults in cornfields and
Right.
vengeful toy soldiers. It's quite a mix.
It really is.
Yeah.
So get ready. We're going to look at what scares us, maybe why it scares us, and, what stuff refuses to go away once you've seen it.
Right. Let's get into it.
So that first question, why write that stuff? His answer basically flips it. He asks, well, why do you assume I have a choice?
Right, that's key. He brings up this idea of the mind filter. Like we all have one filtering reality, but the mesh size is different for everybody.
So what gets stuck in his filter, maybe the really unsettling stuff, might just slide right through yours or mine.
Exactly. And that stuff that gets caught, the stuff that doesn't just, filter through,
Yeah.
he calls it the sludge.
The sludge, okay.
And the sludge, this trapped material, for a lot of people, it becomes a private obsession or, what we politely call a hobby.
Right. Like collecting stamps, but maybe darker.
Kind of. And he suggests that some jobs, especially in the arts, writing, painting, music, they're essentially professional hobbies. They're driven by whatever obsession gets caught in that person's filter.
And he has this litmus test almost.
Okay.
Would you still do it if you weren't getting paid, if people criticized you? Even if you faced, like, jail time?
Yeah. If the answer is yes, he says, that's pretty much obsessional behavior.
So for him, he says his filter catches the stuff of fear, his obsession. It's with the macabre.
And he's really blunt about it. He
Right.
says, look, he didn't write these stories just for the money, although, he enjoyed cashing the checks.
Sure, who wouldn't?
But he wrote them because the ideas occurred to him. They got stuck in his filter, became his obsession. A marketable obsession, he calls it.
That's such a striking phrase, marketable obsession. He even calls art itself a localized illness. Usually benign, he says, but sometimes terribly malignant.
Yeah, and the obsession can feel like a knife in the mind. That's a powerful image.
It really is. And he warns you have to use the knife carefully because it doesn't care who it cuts. And linking back to the filter, he says you have to sift the sludge carefully because some of that stuff may not be dead.
Ooh, that's chilling. The idea that some of the caught stuff might still be alive.
Right. And that leads straight into the second big question he tackles. If he writes it because his filter catches it, well, why do other people read it? What draws us in?
And he mentions this quote he saw about a movie. Something like, a wonderful movie for people who like to slow down and look at car accidents.
Ah, the car accident seems to have that
Yeah.
morbid curiosity.
Exactly, that sort of visceral pull. He thinks our interest in these pocket horrors, these contain doses of terror, it mixes uneasily with revulsion.
And that uneasy mix often leads to guilt, right? You feel a bit bad for being fascinated.
Mm-hmm. And he draws this really interesting parallel. He says, okay, sexual awakening tends towards, copulation continuing the species.
Biology.
Well, becoming aware of our own unavoidable termination, or mortality, that awakens an awareness of fear. And that awareness, he suggests, tends towards a comprehension of the final ending.
Wow. So fear is linked to understanding death.
In a way. And he also points out how fear can just make us blind. Simple things like being scared to turn off a light switch with wet hands or, the classic sticking a knife in the toaster thing. Irrational fear overrides reason.
Okay, so where does horror fiction fit into all this?
Well, he argues that great horror fiction sort of lives right there at that connection point between the conscious and the subconscious. The terminal joining the two, he calls it.
Like a bridge between the rational world and something else.
Exactly. And he feels the best horror often works as allegory. Sometimes the author means it that way, sometimes maybe not. But it taps into those really deep, often buried fears. It's not just a jump scare. It resonates deeper.
Okay, so if his filter catches the stuff of fear, and that's the sludge, let's actually dive into some of these story fragments and see what that sludge looks like when it's, put down on paper, the sheer variety of it.
Yeah, let's unpack it. We can maybe start with the fear of what's hidden, the unseen. That's fundamental horror, isn't it?
Definitely. Like in the Jerusalem's Lot fragments. The scariness there doesn't come from seeing some monster right away. It's built through things like old journal entries hinting at something
What?
awful.
A locked book, deciphering codes, going down into this creepy abandoned cellar.
And the source describes this horror in the cellar being burned on the brain like a tintype. You feel the fear powerfully, even when you don't quite know what it is. It's all implication.
Absolutely, and that gets cranked way up in the boogeyman. You have Lester Billings telling this awful, desperate story about how his kids died, but the monster, it's always just sort of there in the closet.
That detail about the closet door being open just a crack, shiver-inducing.
It is, and Billings' story is full of these really nasty, specific little details that stick with you because you don't see the whole thing. Squishy noise, glimpsing something with slumped shoulders and a scarecrow head, this awful smell, and that sound. The sound of his kid's neck breaking like ice cracking. Horrible. And even though the official cause was, crib death for a 3-year-old, which seems wrong, Billings knows, and he says his wife, quote, finally knew that shared, unspoken terror of the unseen thing. It's potent.
Then you have something like Strawberry Spring. It's different again. Not a closet monster, but this weirdly beautiful but wrong weather. A strawberry spring, a lying spring that comes back every few years.
And it brings a killer with it, Spring Heel Jack.
Yeah. So you have this gorgeous warm weather, but there's this deep sense of dread hanging over the campus. That contrast is what makes it so creepy.
And the unseen killer's presence is punctuated by these moments of just brutal, graphic violence, like finding Adele Parkins dismembered. It plays on that fear that something beautiful can hide something truly ugly and dangerous. Something's just fundamentally off.
Okay, so moving from things hidden to things very, very visible, and maybe even familiar. Technology turning bad, that's another kind of sludge, right? Fear of our own creations.
Oh, definitely. The Mangler starts totally mundane. A big industrial laundry press.
Seen them a million times.
Right. But it becomes sentient, malicious. And there's this weird detail in the source about like easy gel tablets and some belladonna derivative, almost like a modern folk magic, a hand of glory kind of thing involved in bringing it to life.
That's bizarre. But the real horror is the machine itself, the sounds it makes.
Oh, yeah. The fragment describes it making ghastly burping noises, chuckling, even breathing and whispering. It's not just metal, it's alive and nasty. And it ends with the machine breaking loose, out on the streets, gnashing and fuming, leaving a blood stench. Industrial horror made, well, not flesh, but steel.
And even more direct, maybe, is the truck. This fragment puts you right in a diner under siege by trucks.
Sentient trucks just circling outside, sounding like beasts. Again, the familiar turning alien and hostile.
And the people inside try to fight back, barricades, Molotov cocktails, but it feels so useless against this irrational, overwhelming force. And the deaths are described so brutally. A dozer just chewing someone up, a laundry truck running someone down.
It's bleak. The narrator imagines the machines just paving over everything, and that line, I wish I could believe there are people in them. That just captures that fear perfectly, doesn't it? Technology as this unstoppable thing, completely out of our control or understanding.
And there's Battleground, which is, well, it's terrifying, but also kind of darkly funny in its setup.
Yeah, this professional hitman, John Renshaw, gets a package. A toy footlocker. G.I. Joe Vietnam footlocker? Seems harmless.
Until the tiny soldiers and helicopters inside come alive and attack him.
It sounds absurd, but the horror is in the details, the injuries. They're tiny attackers, but the damage is real and described so viscerally.
Oh.
Chopped fingers from mini helicopter blades.
Ow.
A bayoneted ankle. His thigh charred by a tiny bazooka round. Wounds all over his face. It's this desperate, painful fight against something utterly unexpected and relentless.
The absurdity makes the violence almost more shocking. And that ending, the label on the box after the explosive climax. Hey kids, special. Just chillingly ironic. It feels like the filter caught anxieties about war, violence, maybe even toys, and just twisted them.
Absolutely. And that leads us to another deep, primal fear that shows up in the sludge. Body horror. Losing control of your own physical self.
The lead's fragment is intense with this. Arthur, paralyzed, in a wheelchair. But his body isn't just useless, it's being used.
Right, as a doorway and a window for this anonymous intelligence, he calls them.
They don't just passively observe, they control him. The source says they make him kill someone, move the body, all while he's asleep.
It's the ultimate violation, and through them, he perceives the world as twisted and grotesque. That confrontation with Richard, where Arthur's own hands act against his will, calling down lightning. Terrifying.
And that ending detail, where his hands start to physically change, structural change, fingers shortening, pure body horror. His desperate need to lock the doorway because of what happened to his aunt when she saw doctors.
Yeah.
It creates this sense of being trapped, utterly inescapable.
And you mentioned Renshaw in Battleground, again, his body becoming this map of horrific injuries from tiny things. It's that same theme, isn't it? The physical self invaded, brutalized, losing its integrity.
Yeah. And there's that really brief but disturbing bit about Richie Messina. The description is sparse, but wow, effective. His house covered in slimy stuff.
And his voice, like talking through a mouthful of suet. Ugh.
There's this heavy implication of decay, transformation, maybe even something cannibalistic with that line. It ain't just dead cats anymore, is it? And then he just disappears. It hints at this awful physical corruption.
So the sludge isn't just about monsters or killers. It can be about the very places we inhabit, place itself becoming horrific.
Right, not just a backdrop, but an active source of dread, like the old mill basement and graveyard shift.
Exactly. The horror is rooted there, in that specific, neglected, dark place. Finding the subcellar isn't just about finding more space. It's uncovering this huge, ignored problem: rats, bats, serious vermin.
And the fragment shows that College Boy Hall, using actual knowledge like a 1911 zoning ordinance about vermin to point out the danger. And what happens? He gets fired.
Yeah. The place is rotten, the people in charge enable it, and the horror festers in that specific, ignored spot.
We see Jerusalem's lot again, too, in The Man Who Would Not Shake Hands. A family gets stranded there in a blizzard. It's deserted because, as the fragment notes, the town burned out 2 years back.
And crucially, the locals know it's bad. They say it's got at. They wear religious charms for protection.
So the horror isn't just being isolated in a storm. It's being isolated in a place that is fundamentally wrong, corrupted. And the family, the outsiders, they don't know the danger they're in. Their plight is worse because of the place itself.
And maybe the most iconic example of place's horror here is the Nebraska cornfield, described as unnaturally perfect, no weeds, no pests. Which is immediately unsettling, right?
Yeah, like something's deeply wrong. And it's the setting for this absolutely chilling rural cult. The horror builds slowly, finding a suitcase, records linking births to deaths at age 19.
And then that scene in the clearing, oh man. Vicky sacrificed on a crossbar, her eyes replaced with corn silk, mouth stuffed with corn husks.
Flanked by skeletons, one in a priest's surplice. It's just this image of corrupted innocence, children as these cold killers using farm tools as weapons.
Seemingly sanctioned by the place itself. That line, unless the god in question approved, that ties the horror directly to the land, to whatever dark thing lives there. It's terrifying.
Finally, there's the sludge of the mind itself. Psychological horror, trauma that won't stay buried.
Sometimes They Come Back really nails this. Jim Norman, the teacher, he's haunted. Haunted by his brother Wayne's murder years ago. Haunted by his own breakdown.
And his current students. They seem to be almost literal manifestations of his past tormentors, taunting him about his brother.
The dread builds through these creepy incidents linked to them. Vinny scaring him at the phone booth, his wife dying around the same time. It all pushes him to this desperate ritual. Drawing a pentagram with old pennies, dated 1956, the year it all happened, trying to confront the past directly.
And it works, sort of. This Wayne thing appears, looks like his brother at first, but has this cold, greedy voice. It actually destroys the bullies for him.
But the real horror is at the end. The entity's face just melts into this horrible, grinning malignancy, and it promises him, "I'll come back, Jim." It's like a perfect, terrifying metaphor for trauma. You can confront it, maybe even use it, but it might transform into something worse, and it never truly leaves you. It always comes back.
Wow. Okay, so bringing all these different horrors back to the author's introduction, you can really see how this is the sludge, right? The raw material his filter catches. Fear, obsession, manifesting in all these varied ways.
Absolutely. And you see that car accident draw in action. The stories use these incredibly specific, often grotesque details. Corn silk eyes, that ice cracking sound, the mangler's breathing, the tiny wounds from toy soldiers to make the horror visceral, memorable. They're the pocket horrors you can't look away from.
And they really do seem to operate on that bridge he talked about, between the conscious and subconscious. I mean, these are things that couldn't happen rationally, right?
Right. Machines don't just come alive. Toys don't attack. Places aren't usually literally cursed. Trauma doesn't usually take physical form.
But they feel true on some level because they tap into those deeper, maybe allegorical fears we all have.
Fears about losing control, about technology, about innocence being corrupted, about the past catching up to us. Yeah.
And it's often that contrast, isn't it? The totally mundane setting, a laundry, a basement, a classroom, a roadside diner, and then this eruption of the completely irrational and terrifying right within it.
Exactly. That makes it hit harder.
So, thinking about all this, it does make you wonder what our fascination with this dark stuff says about us. That weird mix of being drawn in and repulsed, the guilt of looking at the car wreck, and maybe how facing these fictional fears connects us, even uncomfortably, to our own sense of, well, being fragile, being mortal.
We have definitely sifted through some pretty dark and fascinating sludge today, exploring those filters of creativity and the landscapes of fear they reveal.
And the author leaves us with that thought about the sludge, the stuff caught in the filter that refuses to just go away, and that warning. Sift the sludge carefully because some of that stuff may not be dead.
Makes you think, doesn't it? What's in your mind's filter that maybe refuses to go down the drain?
Is any of it not quite dead? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.